Hello. So let's get started. I'm here with Dr. John Apsley, and this is Sangeeta Patty, and we are starting with the webinar today on how to detoxify like the long living. The long living in the blue zones, that 5 areas on the earth where people live long, healthy lives, degenerating after the age of 80, and maintaining their health on an annual income of less than $1,000 a year with no doctors. So I want to start with just putting us in a position to understand this, and I talked about this last week, but basically there's 5 areas that one has to optimize to regenerate like the long living, one of them being optimizing the hormones and the nutrition to the 75th percentile, our belief system that we indeed have the best of our lives in front of us, and correcting the oxygenation to the microcirculation. Today and the next 2 webinars, the topic is, how do we detoxify like the long living? In the US, we're exposed to more chemical toxins than those in many other developed countries. And the main sources of toxins turn out to be our water, our air, the body products, the house products, and unfortunately, the food that we have to eat, right? Let's talk about the water for a second, because I would say this probably ends up being one of the most important areas of detoxification. Being that the body is over 70% by volume water, obviously water has the ability to control many of the chemical reactions in the body, all the liver detoxification processes, the gut detoxification processes, and any detoxification that's happening either intracellularly or outside of the cell. But our water is treated with chlorine, and that chlorine turns into hypochlorites, which are cancer-causing in and of themselves, but also they displace a powerful protective and needed agent in the body, which is iodine. And of course, also it results in bromism, or a low thyroid state, because we're displacing the iodine that's needed for thyroid activity. The life of a cell is immortal. It's the fluid in which it floats that degenerates. This is a huge clue, and Alexis Carrel in the 1900s ended up keeping a chick cell alive for 34 years. By changing out the water, by enhancing the detoxification mechanisms. And this continued until someone changed the fluid with the wrong stuff. Part of the detoxification process in that, and also in the long living, is enhanced by the structure of the water cells. And as we talked about last time, the structure of a molecule determines its function. So carbon structure determines whether it's a diamond or a graphite. Silicon dioxide structure determines whether it's quartz or glass. Similarly, the people in the long-living areas have structured water because of the vortexes and the colloids we talked about, and those optimize detoxification. There are many studies that actually show that water function depends on its structure. So more than just clean water, we have to pay attention to how we structure the water. And that's something, if we don't have mineral colloid water coming down from the mountain, we don't have access to this. So this is something we'll show you at the end of this talk.
One thing we should point out is that we were all taught in med school the wrong chemistry for the body. These references here, starting with Gilbert Ling, this was the first group that showed that the water inside cells is a gel, and all of the chemistry acts in a suspension, so that there's a vibration of movement of all the different molecules of chemistry that causes enzymes to work, the DNA to replicate, the RNA to make enzymes. So all the proteomics and genomics relate to the structured water. So either through the water structure not being what it should be, or for a dehydration effect that's present, that's where the chemistry of the body begins to dwindle and we lose health. Last thing, the long-living people really take advantage of their structured water, which comes down from the mountaintops. These are high-energy waters full of minerals, minerals full of zeta potential that goes into their food chain, and that's really the secret of why they live long and only need to earn $1,000 a year to live like basically gods and goddesses. And really, these people don't die until they're 105 to 110, really in perfect health. They just slow down and then they stop drinking, and that's how they pass on.
Wow. Try to replicate that, right? So the next area that we pay attention to with toxicities is the air. And we know that the state of the air right now is contaminated with emissions and automobiles and forest fires, some that are man-made and some that are natural, but our air is just not as clean as it used to be. So that's an area to pay attention to. Another area is house products. The products that we use in the house end up being full of toxins, and we'll talk about how to avoid them. The products we use on our body, if you look at, whether it's a shampoo or whether it's a deodorant or a lotion or a perfume or a hairspray or an eyeshadow, they're full of chemicals. And when you look at the list of chemicals and you look at the list of chemicals listed as potential carcinogens from the National Cancer Institute, you see that most of these chemicals have not been banned in body products because body products are not considered to be food. But it turns out that anything we put on our skin is absorbed better than what we even eat. So if you wouldn't eat it, and I don't think I'd eat any of these things, you wouldn't put it on your skin. Dry cleaning. Trichloroethylene is associated with cancer in humans, and we're just touching on some of the ones that seem to be pertinent. House materials. All of the woods and the paints and the products that we use in the homes, even if they're natural materials, are often coated with things like perfluorooctanic acid, which that one is an endocrine disruptor and is very well known to have hormonal effects, cause infertility and decrease semen. And it turns out that anything that they want to make water or oil resistant generally has some amount of the PFOA in it. So these are the kind of things that you can actually look up and choose different materials when you have a choice in your homes. And what about our food? I don't know if that's food, but that's a picture of some of the stuff available in our grocery store. And then there's real food. The question that we always ask ourselves is organic food better? And we know from studies that it has more nutrients and antioxidants. But what about avoiding pesticides and GMO? What do we know about pesticides and GMO? We know that pesticides pervade every layer of life, all the way from the air to the humans to the animals to the water to the trees, once we use them. And there's lots of studies on the different pesticides and fertilizers that have been used. This one, lindane, is a pesticide which is carcinogenic. And there's many of them that are suspected disruptors of the endocrine system. And DDT, of course, has been banned in the United States, but when they sample vegetables and fruits in the regular market, it seems that many of them still have DDT on them because they are transported from other countries where DDT is not illegal to use. So it's important to realize that there's a lot of chemicals that are in the foods unless they're labeled organic. And we know that pesticides are associated with multiple different kinds of diseases, including birth defects. And many of you may know that just a few months ago, they finally awarded a cancer victim a lot of money because they were able to prove that there was an association between the Roundup that this gentleman was exposed to and his lymphoma that he was terminal with. So we're starting to become aware and wake up to the fact that these things exist. And it's interesting because when you talk to most gardeners, Roundup is a staple. And unless you ask people what they're using, they may say, "Oh, it's natural. It's labeled as a natural product." But it turns out that that definition of natural doesn't really mean anything, and you really have to look at the label to see what you're getting. And then what about GMO? Is that really a problem? Kind of hard to shop in the United States without getting GMO products. And if you look at the studies, a review of the rodent studies in 2009 found organ damage in every single rodent that they examined. And when they did the pathology in the stomach lining, the change was really quite astonishing. There was a lot of inflammation in any animals that were fed GMO products. So obviously we know that it makes a physical pathological change. And on top of that, it creates a lot of different health risks, which were all documented in animal studies. So stay away from GMO. But the current approval of GMO, I mean, I really consider this one of the world's largest human experiments because there's never been a human trial. So we just released it broadly. There was never any evaluation, any assumption that was actually tested, and all the studies that were actually used to approve it were industry studies from the makers of the products. So American markets right now are about 68% GMO, whereas a market in Madrid is going to be less than 1% GMO because they have those restrictions. And there's many countries around the world that have actually banned it. We're at 66%, and behind us is Brazil at 25%, and that was in 2010. Most of Europe is down under 0.1%. So we know that, at a public health policy level, we're able to make these differences if we are aware. The idea and the purpose of having these kind of discussions is to be aware of what the deal is, and then you can make good choices around them. So what about wine? People ask me this question all the time, and there's many studies about wine. And there's some studies that show that it increases breast cancer. And even if it's greater than 3 drinks per week. But what we have to remember in some of these studies is we are in these studies, these were done in the United States, we're not really looking at the other parts of life and how they're detoxifying and what else they're eating, because everything about what you put in your body has to do with how the rest of the things are. So I'm not putting a lot of weight on this, but I think it's important to realize that alcohol is a toxin in the body, as is aspartame. And if any of you wonder where aspartame comes from, it comes from a genetically modified E. coli. And it's actually the toxic waste of that E. coli. And it's been associated with a disturbance in metabolism and protein structure and neuronal function and endocrine imbalances. So this is the one that's in equal, right?
I believe so,
equal. So it's something just to pay attention to, because a lot of products actually, when they say sugar-free, they're substituting in aspartame. So this is something to avoid. Read labels. Colas that have bromide in them, they displace iodine, and that's something to stay away from. And what about the plastics and the hormone disruptors? This actually became a top priority somewhere in the early 2000s, when bisphenol A was found to be associated with um, huge effects on the endocrine system, on the reproductive system, on all kinds of areas. And in fact, many states and countries decided to ban BPA in baby bottles. But what about if you're not a baby, right? So these plastic bottles that we have water in do have BPA. Is it any better to have a BPA-free bottle? And I would say no, because BPA-free bottles still have phthalates. And phthalates are very well-known endocrine disruptors. They affect male sexual differentiation, and they cause reproductive problems in men, many studies showing that. And you see pictures of these babies because I think we really have to become quite conscious of the kind of toys and the kind of things we put around our babies. The babies, when they measure phthalate levels in babies' urine, by 1 month old, most babies in the United States have a lot of phthalates coming out in their urine because everything is plastic. The toys, the rattles, the bottles, everything's plastic. Um, and the great news about phthalates is that if you completely eliminate all plastic from food containers and lotion bottles, and take a fresh food diet for 3 days, you pretty much eliminate the phthalates. So it's pretty easy to get rid of, and that's really good news, right?
Yeah. Just a couple of things to bring you into a state where you realize you can do something about this. First, an overall perspective. So we've been covering all the toxins that are in our air, water, and food. And I had occasion to correspond with Aaron Blair, who's been heading up the NIH's epidemiological department for years. And he stated in 2004, and I had to get his references, that up to 90% of the cancer in the United States comes from environmental toxins. And so when he provided me those studies, it was quite startling because that's what we're seeing here too. It's not just cancer, but it's most of the, if not all of the chronic illnesses, the autoimmune diseases that we're seeing today. So that's part one. Part two, by looking at the long living individuals, by watching what they do, all we have to do is to mimic. And a lot of this we can remove from the body in pretty short order. And so these are the kinds of things that Dr. Patty and I are working on. We're headed to the hot springs in Arkansas for 2 weeks to go through a program there that's been used for thousands of years to really augment the regenerative detoxification system that is replete across the world in these hot springs. So we'll update you on that as time goes along.
That's exciting. So what about heavy metals? And these include things like aluminum, mercury, lead, and cadmium. And we know that heavy metals displace metals like calcium and magnesium, which we need. So they're well linked to osteoporosis and hormone resistance. I've had patients who couldn't even have hormone activity because of metals that were blocking the receptor sites. Neurological decline, idiopathic hives and allergies, and the list is endless, and cancer definitely is on this list.
There's an interesting set of about 4 or 5 dozen peer reviews that showed studies that were done through major university hospitals of what's common between all the most common forms of cancer, and only 5 were able to be found that was common denominators, but one of them was toxic metals, heavy metals. So I've been seeing that the patients that we're addressing that have cancer, and we support them with our immune programs, that they need zeolite like crazy for the first month just to remove these heavy metals from their system. And that's exactly what these studies showed that are published, that once the heavy metals were removed from these cancer patients, their immune systems turned back on again, and they fared so much better over the next 2 or 3 years of their integrative nutritional program.
The WHO says that mercury is toxic to the nervous system, and the WHO usually reviews hundreds of studies before they say anything. So that's a pretty strong statement when they come out with it. The symptoms include things that are neurological: tremors, insomnia, memory loss, cognitive and motor dysfunction, headaches, neuromuscular effects. Mercury is also well known to poison the cardiovascular system. It depletes mitochondrial glutathione, which is a major detoxifier, and the clinical consequences include things like high blood pressure, heart attacks, arrhythmias, carotid artery plaques, and various things like that. And there's actually places in the United States and studies that show that removing mercury from the system, like by chelation, decreases all of the plaque and reverses the atherosclerosis. So it's very powerful to get rid of mercury. And I don't think the only way is, of course, to chelate. Nanozeolite, which we have at MD Prescriptives now, actually binds it out. But if you have a source of mercury in your mouth, you need to remove that. And so the sources of heavy metals include mercury amalgams in the mouth, which it's surprising when you ask people how many actually have mercury amalgams. And then supplements that are contaminated, and this is very well known that if your supplement company is not looking at contamination, there is that. Cigarette smoke, and of course, large fish. And we're going to go over which fish and how to choose fish in this talk. What about invisible electromagnetic radiation? The key word here is invisible because they're everywhere. They're in power lines, AM/FM radios, mobile phones, microwave ovens, heat lamps, tanning booths, X-rays, and they're basically invisible. It's everywhere. We know that cell phone, if you have a cell phone, smartphones, smart meters, GPS, satellite radio, SunPass, electronics, Wi-Fi. Is the point to get scared? No. Again, becoming aware is the first step, and that's what this is about. And then we'll also show you how you reduce exposure, but also how you can protect yourself. Even electrical outlets are a source of electromagnetic radiation that is harmful for the body. In the United States, we're starting to see camouflaged cell towers because cell towers are a major source of electromagnetic radiation. And these are just some examples of cell towers that are hidden in structures that are rather innocent looking, if you wouldn't know. The National Council on Radiation Protection said that 2 milligauss of EMF radiation is what the human body can handle at any one exposure. And if you look, starting with computers, the exposure is above 5 milligrams, and it goes to blenders, which is at 220 milligausses. And I think that's just absolutely surprising when I saw that. Airplanes, 50 milligausses per certain amount of travel, and hair dryers. So it's a matter of becoming familiar and aware. This low-level radiation causes DNA breaks, and there are studies showing these DNA breaks. And there was actually a physicist who studied over 600 studies and found that the electromagnetic radiation caused DNA breaks, chromosomal aberrations, it increased cancer activity in the cells, it altered brain activity, damaged sperm. And I don't know why this slide's like this, but there's many studies showing that cell phones damage the sperm number and function and quality and shape. So they are definitely linked to infertility. Another epidemiological study showing that it affects reproduction by affecting pineal gland function. This is an MRI, and radiation study, which shows that the thicker the skull, the lower the penetration of the cell phone across the skull. So a 5-year-old's penetration would be almost to the other side of the head, whereas an adult, it wouldn't go even halfway through. So this is important. This is why children should never be exposed to cell phones. And I even question whether adults should. Many studies have come out. This one made the news, which found an increased risk of tumor on the side of the cell phone, on the head, and that the exposure to the mobile phones not only increased the risk for brain tumors, but also for various other things, including childhood leukemia, immune system allergic and inflammatory responses. And I don't know that it's really clear that the cause of this is only electromagnetic radiation. I feel there may be other things that are part of it. It may be behavioral things even, but it's just something to be aware of. The same electromagnetic radiation, no matter what the source, decreases melatonin production. And you may know that melatonin is a significant part of our immune system. So there are a lot of effects that have been shown to occur. So it'll be very important for us to share with you how you're going to protect yourself from these effects, right? And that's what we're going to do.
Yeah, so two things before we dive into it to keep in mind are supplementing with melatonin. And the second thing would be to take these toxic EMFs and either block them or convert them into healthy waveforms that the body can use for productive purposes.
So what we're saying is that you have to pay attention to your water, your air, your house products, your body products, your dry cleaning, your house materials, your food, exposure to GMO and pesticides, alcohol, aspartame, colas, plastics, and BPA. That means use stainless steel and glass, heavy metals, and cell phones. So before we talk about how we protect ourselves, let's quickly go through how we can detect toxins. So in the body, there are some mechanisms that can help detect toxins. One of them is a heavy metal challenge test, which you can order and look at the urine and take a look at whether you have lead, mercury, aluminum, cadmium, any of these kind of things. You can also measure toxic estrogens, and it'll give you an idea of whether you have excess of exposure to bisphenol A and what we call xenoestrogens from the plastics. You can do a stool assessment to see if you've got any of the toxins or any of the bugs that are associated with things. And I'm just giving you an example of different tests that are available. You can do live blood observation, and through live blood observation, you can detect yeast and mycoplasma and liver toxins. So there are some ways to measure your toxicities. And now we get to the most important part, which is how to detoxify, like the long living. So there's two parts to this. One is to survey your toxins and eliminate them. And the second is to enhance your natural detoxification processes through the skin, liver, intestines, kidneys, lungs, lymphatics. And there are all kinds of little toxic surveys that you can get on the internet. And you can see this is an example of one here. But let's talk about exactly some of the things you're going to do to eliminate these toxins. So one of them is to make your own cleaners with essential oils, vinegar, lemon. Actually, it's unbelievable how good these cleaners can be, and it completely eliminates the need for getting anything toxic. Make your own body products, because what's applied to your skin is absorbed like you put it in your mouth. So if you wouldn't eat it, don't use it on your body. Even organic products can be preserved with toxins. So if you buy them, look for essential oils as preservatives, such as orange and lemon oil. And the base of most skin products and body products usually would be things like shea butter, coconut oil, jojoba, olive oil, and always organic. So you're avoiding the pesticides and the GMO. And it's lots of fun too. Lots and lots of fun. Investigate and choose your house materials wisely. I've given you one website where I look up materials, but there are many more now on the internet. Eat real food, organic or local. Read your package label. Choose your fish wisely. So what does that mean? Avoid any fish from the Pacific Ocean and Alaska due to the radiation from Fukushima. Avoid the big fish. And eat flounder, salmon, sardines, herring, catfish. There's a website you can look at.
From the North Atlantic.
From the North Atlantic. And get tested for heavy metals through a urine challenge test. If you eat fish, take bentonite clay with the fish because it'll bind out the mercury. Remove your mercury fillings. You have to find a dentist who does this with a proper technique, which usually involves some kind of a dam barrier that they put so you don't get exposed.
Plus vacuum.
And a vacuum. Reduce the exposure and neutralize the electromagnetic field. So you can turn off your Wi-Fi and cell at night. You can eliminate and avoid electronics that have high EMR output, and I showed you some of them. You can ground yourself. You can neutralize yourself with a cell phone blocker that actually converts it to good EMRs, and I'll show you what those are. You can put a power med device on any electronic equipment to convert it to a good form of EMF. You can put volcanic ash, I call it dragonite, comes from PRL, around your house and around your smart meters. You can ask people to remove your smart meters. Here in Florida, we're actually able to ask for them to remove it, from what I understand. And I want to talk to you a little bit about shields that do protect from the bad effects of the cell phone. And there was actually a study to show that the effectivity of the shields, and it turns out it's very important what shield you actually pick. So this is one of the shields which showed that there were DNA changes that were induced in 5 minutes of cell phone exposure. And basically there was a 40% increase in the rate of DNA rewinding. And that effect was reduced by 95% by a paramagnetic shield. We've done a pretty good study of all the shields in the market, and there's 2 shields that we talk about. One of them is the Q-disc, and the other one is the shield. And the shield is basically, you know, able to not just neutralize the effects, but it also converts the effects to beneficial effects on the body.
I just got back from Hong Kong a few months ago, and the U.S. Army had given the neurological department there a special device to cause the exact same trauma to the brain in rats. And they were able to take the ingredients, the active particles of the shield, integrate it into an LED system, and shine it on the rat after the injury took place. The rats that were so treated were able to make 100% recovery, both in terms of function as well as histology, within 7 days, versus the control groups that never made a complete recovery, histologically speaking, but might have regained about 40 to 60% of their function. So there are materials that are coming out today that are emerging in the marketplace that can really help us to not only protect our neurological tissues, but also to help regenerate them.
Yeah, I've given you the website, and we'll be putting the website up, but there's a website, regenerativlifestyles.com, where you can actually purchase this shield. And then there's the Radiant Living Center, which has the Q disc. And the Q disc is also a magnetic type disc, which you put on the back of a phone. And this one also does similar things, but doesn't necessarily turn it into a therapeutic device. So, there's a little difference between both of them, but both of them are good shields that we use actively in our practice. So as far as toxicities, we've suggested paying attention to all of these items and the EMFs from the phone. Regardless of avoidance and reduction and measurement, every day your magnificent body removes chemicals from the air, the water, the food, the lotions, and the potions. The most important mechanism by which it does this has to do with the water. So here we have to pay attention to using clean water, which means a system that is filtering out and removing chlorine and microorganisms. But there's also, and you can get clean water just by having a filter system installed or having a simple filter system that you buy, like the one shown up top that happens to be a Brita. I always like glass in the thing because I don't like the leaching of the plastic. But you can also get more advanced and go for something like a water ionizer or something that gives you hydrogen water. And can you talk a little bit about this?
Yeah, this particular company does more research than others that I'm aware of, and they, to date, have the highest sustained part per million concentration of hydrogen in their alkaline water. It's not an easy feat to accomplish. And so for the price, it's really unmatched, and you get all the benefits of both alkaline water as well as for hydrogen-rich water. Now, what's important about hydrogen-rich water? There's about 400 peer review on this. Basically, one of the key radical oxygen species involved with inflammation in the body is hydroxyl radical, OH. So by drinking hydrogen-rich water, the H, hydrogen, combines with the OH to make water. And this is a normal process. This is one of the reasons why we get dehydrated, is that we're not taking that OH that we produce through our metabolism and converting it back into water. So this is one way to really ease the amount of inflammation in the body while we also help the inside of cells regain their full hydration.
Yeah, it has kind of a big ticket on it, but I'll tell you, this is definitely better than the Kangen water system, from what I've seen. This just does a lot more. If you're going to drink bottled water, drink bottled water that comes in a glass bottle. And Mountain Valley spring water is actually from a source that started to be collected in the 1800s. And Mountain Valley spring water actually trickles down the mountain and vortexes down the mountain. So this is as close to structured water as you'll get in a bottle, especially a glass bottle. And let's talk about a structure a little bit, because the two previous, the methods that we showed you for clean water or even hydrogen water, they don't necessarily structure the water. And we've talked about the studies showing that structured water is obviously an important part of the function. And it turns out that you can structure your water simply with prayer. And this is under a microscope showing tap water before and after prayer. So this is an important feature that you can use anywhere. Most of your food is water. So bless your food and you'll be structuring it, right? But you can also use a vortex like the Vitalizer Plus, and you can see that there's actually pictures here of distilled water before vortexing and after vortexing. So usually that vortex cycle you do for about 29 minutes. So if you take water from one item and put it into a vortexer or say a prayer on it, you're going to end up with structured water or mineral water from a stream. So water becomes really important. You can also take your water and put it in the sun, because sunlight happens to structure water, and structure holds the energy through charge separation. So again, sunlight can give us energy through the water. For hydration, because water is the most important part of the body and also detoxification, I recommend this drink called Adrenal Aid. And you're going to want to use in the morning 100 to 120 ounces of structured water, pure, clean, structured water, pink salt to taste. If you have adrenal insufficiency or a lot of stress, you're going to need more pink salt, and your body will know, so your taste buds will want more. Usually you use some lemon or raw apple cider vinegar, whichever one you prefer, and possibly raw honey. This is a tasty drink, but the most important feature of this is to make the entire 100 to 120 ounces in the morning, and then to pace yourself and drink it by 8 p.m. in the evening. What about air? So one thing you can do is you can clean your air with plants, because plants oxygenate, and they've been shown and studied by NASA and the NIH. They reduce in-home pollutants. And it turns out that there's a number of plants that are normal plants we use, palms especially, that are very good at cleaning the air. You can also get a little fancier and put a HEPA and a UV filter. Some of these filter systems actually sit in your central air duct, so they filter out all kinds of bugs and things like that. So this is something which I think is worth it in a house. Breathing, we talked about this last time, just breathing in and out, getting more oxygen. Oxygen detoxifies the body. And possibly using oxygen concentrators to accelerate the detoxification. And oxygen concentrators take your air oxygen of 21% and put it at about 90%. So it's pretty exciting. And this is one of the oxygen concentrators that's available at Regenerative Lifestyles. And we'll be putting these websites up in the attachments for this webinar so that you can get access to all of them.
Just one note, I just noticed that the price went up today, as a matter of fact, by $100, but this is one of the better 10 liter per minute generators. One of the things that we know, but we don't readily understand, is that when you increase the amount of oxygen in the body, it lowers down the radical oxygen species like OH. And the reason is because the oxygen will more quickly combine with hydrogen at the end of the final common pathway, the electron transport chain, after it's made all of its ATP, to make water. So if the oxygen at that point combines with the excess hydrogen to make water, then there's not very much left to make OH radical and the other ROSs in the system. So that's the reason why that EWOT plays such a huge role here, to rehydrate the body while it increases ATP. But also it's important to realize that when you become dehydrated, when your patients become dehydrated, they also are going to be just as low in oxygen and just as acidic. So by way of making water, you're turning that acid, for the most part, at least the upstream source of the acid, into water, which is a neutral pH. And this is reflected by taking your basal urine first thing in the morning and seeing how close you can get to being at 6.7 or higher with an accurate pH strip or meter.
Good point. So there are different ways to measure the pH, and it turns out that we like the digital meters instead of the little urine strips, because the urine strips actually oxidize over time and they become inaccurate. So the morning urine is what you want to test, and you want a morning urine greater than 6.7. And if it's greater than 6.7, you know that you are going to be able to detoxify optimally. If it's less than 6.7, we know that we need more water, more oxygen, more minerals, and if we still can't get it above 6.7, we start looking for infections. You saw us mention a lot of products today that have to do with enhancing general detoxification, and most of these are available on the internet from different sites, which we'll be putting up. But I think the most important thing to realize is that if you drink pure water at 100 to 120 ounces with the lemon and salt, and you breathe clean oxygen and avoid the toxicities we talked about, you're already way ahead of the game. And that's a good place to start. We're going to be covering the detoxification of the body and how we enhance our natural detoxification systems and what the actual protocols are for that in our next webinar. And so stay tuned. We're going to give you protocols on the next webinar for bowel, IBS, heartburn,
and liver.
Liver and kidneys on the webinar after that. So we're hoping that you'll join us. Thank you so much for joining us today. And if you have any questions, this would be a good time for you to ask them. So how soon will the previous webinar and today's be posted? So they are being posted. If you go to the original email and click under View Now, you'll be able to see the webinars. So you don't need to go to MD Prescriptive's website. You just go to the Go to Webinar on our previous webinar in your email where we confirmed it, and you'll be able to see that. And if you can't, I would like you to email us, and I can give you my email, which is spatty@sejun.com.
Or you can also contact me at japsley@sejun.com.
Okay, so we really appreciate your attendance today, and we're hoping that this is helping you regenerate like the long living. Go breathe, drink some oxygen, breathe some oxygen, drink some water, and we'll see you the next time.